Hello students, hope all of you are safe at home. I think in the previous video we have learned about the external structure of the human brain. So as given in the textbook, try to learn the locations followed by function, and just like the earlier chapters, write the location and function of the parts from this chapter in your classwork, and even draw the diagram of a neuron. Now, let us start with the next part of the lesson, where we are going to learn about the primary regions of the brain. Now, what do you mean by primary regions of the brain? Now, in these regions, we consider both the external followed by internal structure of the human brain. So you can say that the primary regions of the brain, it includes both external and internal part of the human brain. So according to this, we have three parts known as a forebrain, midbrain and the hindbrain. Now, the forebrain comprises cerebellum, which already we have learnt. So we know that the cerebellum has a number of convolutions, and we already learnt the functions of cerebellum, which is a seat of memory, consciousness, intelligence, willpower, helps us in viewing the objects, hearing, etc. Right, children? So the first part of the forebrain is the cerebellum, which we are already familiar with. The second part of the forebrain is known as a diencephalon. Children, so what is the second part of the forebrain? The second part of the forebrain is diencephalon. So what do we call it as? We name it as a diencephalon. And this diencephalon comprises two parts. It comprises two more parts, and the first part of a diencephalon is known as a thalamus, and the second part is known as a hypothalamus. So the forebrain comprises two regions known as a cerebellum followed by diencephalon, and that diencephalon is further made up of thalamus followed by hypothalamus. So where do we have this thalamus? Children, if you observe carefully, this is the corpus callosum. We know that the cerebral hemispheres are connected to each other by a sheet of nerve fibers known as a corpus callosum. So this is the corpus callosum. Now, just below the cerebral cortex, we find an egg-like structure. It appears like a egg-like structure, and this structure is nothing but the thalamus. Right? So how do we identify the thalamus? The thalamus is an egg-like structure which is situated below the cerebrum or a cerebral cortex. So what is the function of thalamus? Thalamus, in fact, relays all the motor followed by sensory impulses. So whatever the impulses that we receive from the sense organs, okay, or from the muscles, all those impulses are conveyed to the cerebrum or conveyed to the cerebral cortex because of the thalamus. Right? So what is the function of thalamus? Or in a simple way we can say that it helps in the conduction of impulses like pain, followed by pressure, right? So what are the functions of thalamus? Thalamus is concerned with conducting motor and sensory impulses such as pain followed by pressure impulses to the cerebrum. So how do we identify the thalamus? Thalamus is an egg-like structure situated below the cerebrum. Now, what is the other part? The second part of the diencephalon is the hypothalamus. So, just at the base of thalamus, we find a tube-like structure, and this tube-like structure is the hypothalamus. Right? So, this is the tube-like structure which is arising from the base of thalamus, and we call it as a hypothalamus. And at the base of the hypothalamus, we have one of the endocrine gland. We find one of the endocrine gland. And what is the name of the endocrine gland? This endocrine gland is nothing but the master gland. We name it as a pituitary gland. In fact, this is one of the endocrine gland, and this endocrine gland is named as a master gland because it controls all the other endocrine glands in our body such as thyroid gland, adrenal gland, pancreas, and so on. Now, so from the base of thalamus we have a hypothalamus. So at the base of hypothalamus we find the pituitary gland. So what are the functions of hypothalamus? In fact, the hypothalamus controls the master gland. So you can say that. So one of the function of hypothalamus is to control the pituitary gland. Right? So along with controlling the pituitary gland, even the hypothalamus is it maintains our body temperature, or you can say that it regulates our body temperature. So what is the meaning of regulates the body temperature? When our body temperature is too low, it conducts the impulses to the body cells to carry out respiration, thereby releasing the heat energy so that our body temperature is maintained. Or when the temperature is too high, it conducts the impulses, or there is no cellular respiration occurring in the cell so that there is no increase in the body temperature. So thus you can say that hypothalamus helps in controlling our body temperature, or you can say regulating the body temperature. So whenever we use the word regulate, it can be in both the ways. Either it helps in increasing the body temperature, or it tries to decrease our body temperature. Along with this function, it is also concerned with regulating our thirst, our hunger, followed by our sleeping pattern, right? And also our waking pattern, right? So thus you can say that hypothalamus has a number of functions. Out of many functions, these two are very important. If they ask you the function of hypothalamus, you have to answer the first two. So what are the functions of hypothalamus? Hypothalamus controls the pituitary gland. It regulates our body temperature, and it is also concerned with regulating our thirst, hunger, sleep, and waking pattern in our day-to-day life activity. Yes, children. So thus the diencephalon comprises thalamus followed by hypothalamus. Now the next region is the midbrain. So in between our forebrain and the hindbrain. In between our forebrain and the hindbrain, we find a small tubular structure, and the small tubular structure is nothing but the midbrain. So you can say that it acts as a relay station. It acts as a relay station conducting impulses from hindbrain to the forebrain, or vice versa. Or you can say that the main function of midbrain is it is concerned with the reflexes. It is concerned with the reflexes. What is the meaning of a reflexes? Reflexes are nothing but the sudden actions which are brought about in our body, and especially it is related with the sudden actions which are concerned with our eyes and ears. So what is the main function of midbrain? You can say that the midbrain is associated with the reflexes which is connected to our eyes and ears. Right? So it's very easy to remember. Both are the sense organs, that is the eyes and ears, and it is concerned with the sudden actions related with your eyes and ears. So whenever someone throws a chalk on your face, suddenly your eyeball or eyes are shut. So in such case, we have a midbrain which is conducting impulses to our eyes to shut so that your eyes are not damaged. Right? So thus you can say that midbrain is a small tubular part which connects our forebrain to the hindbrain, concerned with the reflexes involving or in association with eyes and ears. Now the last part, known as a hindbrain. So what do we find in the hindbrain? The hindbrain comprises three parts. It comprises three parts. The first part, you're already familiar with the first part, known as a cerebellum. Yes, children. So we find the cerebellum at the base of the cerebrum, right? So what are the functions of cerebellum? Cerebellum is associated with balancing the body, followed by coordination of muscles. So we know that internally it looks like a branching tree. And one more thing children, now the cerebellum does not contain any convolutions. But if you look at the cerebellum from external view, it appears as though it has a number of grooves. So you don't find convolutions like the cerebrum. Only you will find the furrows or grooves in case of the cerebellum. Right? Now, so what is the first part of the hindbrain? That is a cerebellum, and along with that there is a second part known as a pons, and the third part is nothing but the medulla oblongata. Right? So we are familiar with the cerebellum. We know about medulla oblongata, which is the stem of the brain found at the base of the skull, carrying out the functions associated with the internal organs of the body. Now, what about pons? So we find this pons in front of the cerebellum, or if you view from this direction, you can say that it is found below. The pons is below the cerebellum. So what is the location of the pons? The pons is below the cerebellum, or you can say that it is in the center of the brain. So if you just draw a circle to the, if you consider this as entire brain, so you will find the pons almost exactly in the center of the brain. So what is the location of a pons? Pons is in the center of the brain. It is in the center of the brain. Along with that, it is also found below the cerebellum. Then, what is the function of pons? Just like the corpus callosum, which conducts impulses from the right cerebral hemisphere to the left cerebral hemisphere, in the same way, pons performs the function in relation with cerebellum. We know that cerebellum also has two parts. Cerebellum also has two parts. What do we call it as a right cerebellum followed by left cerebellum, right? So what is the function of the pons? The pons, which is found below the cerebellum, helps in the conduction of impulses from the right cerebellum to the left cerebellum and vice versa, helping in the balancing of body followed by conduction of nerve impulses. Okay, children? Yes. And the third part, as we know, it is the medulla oblongata, which controls all our internal organs of the body. So thus you can say that the hindbrain comprises three parts known as cerebellum, pons, followed by medulla oblongata. Children, sometimes you can expect, the primary regions of the brain for an odd one out. Right? They may certain times, give you the words like cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus, followed by cerebellum. So if you look at these four words, cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus and cerebellum, just look at the caption. So if you look at this, you can say that among these four, cerebellum is an odd one out because it is a part of the hindbrain, whereas other three are the parts of the forebrain. So you can expect one such question in an odd one out from this primary regions of the brain, or you can expect a number of functions from these regions of the brain. Now let us learn about the spinal cord, which is the second part of the central nervous system. We find the spinal cord in the vertebral column. So spinal cord arises from the medulla oblongata, runs the whole length of the backbone, passing through the neural canal and ends at second lumbar vertebrae. Children, so what is the location of the spinal cord? So spinal cord arises from the medulla oblongata of the brain, runs the whole length of the vertebral column or the backbone, passing through the passage known as a neural canal, and it ends at the second lumbar vertebrae. Children, if you remember, in the skeletal system, we have learnt about the vertebrae found in different parts of the body, such as in the cervical region, thoracic region, lumbar region, sacral, followed by coccyx. But remember that the spinal cord ends at second lumbar vertebrae. So when you write the location of the spinal cord, you have to be very clear. You have to use three words carefully. That is, it arises from the medulla oblongata, runs the whole length of the backbone, passing through the neural canal and ends at second lumbar vertebrae. So whenever they ask you about the location, children, you have to write it as given in the textbook. Now, let us learn about the structure of the spinal cord. Children, when you just observe the spinal cord in its cross section, so when a small piece of the spinal cord is observed, so what you can see here is the cross section of the spinal cord. So if you observe the cross section of the spinal cord, just like the brain, we also find the arrangement of gray matter followed by white matter even in the spinal cord. So what do we find in the gray matter, or where do we find the gray matter? So you can observe that there is a butterfly shaped structure within the spinal cord. So this butterfly shaped structure is nothing but the structure which represents the gray matter. So this is the region, what do we call it as a gray matter, and in this gray matter we find the cytons of the neurons. Then outside this region, what I am representing with the pink dots is the outer region, and in the outer region, so this is a region where we find the white matter, and in the white matter we find the axons of the neurons. Children, if you observe the arrangement of cytons and axons, it is reversed from that of in the brain. So if you remember, in the brain we learned that the outer gray matter contains cytons and inner white matter contains axons. But if you look at the spinal cord, we find the gray matter again containing the same cytons, but it is inside, whereas the white matter contains the axons which is on the outer side. So again, when they ask you about the arrangement of neurons in the spinal cord, children, again you have to use the 6 words similar to the brain. So you have to say, in the spinal cord we find inner gray matter containing cyton, okay, and then outer white matter containing axons. So thus you have to use the 6 words when they ask you about the arrangement of a neurons in the spinal cord. Sometimes you can expect the difference in the arrangement of brain followed by the spinal cord. So each time you have to repeat the words, okay, otherwise you will be losing marks. Now, gray matter contains the cytons. Now if you observe, in the earlier videos we have learned that there are 3 neurons, okay, that is sensory neuron. What we observe is a sensory neuron. The green color one is the association neuron or an interconnecting neuron, and the blue color is the motor neuron. So I said the inner region is gray in color due to the presence of cytons. So if you observe in the diagram, we find the cyton of the association neuron and cyton of the motor neuron. So because of these 2 cytons, we find the inner region is gray in color. Along with that, we find the outer region which is white in color because we find the axons. So you can find this is an axon of the sensory neuron which provides white coloration, and this is the axon of the motor neuron which is found in the outer region which imparts a white coloration to the outer region. Along with this, sometimes from this region you may find even certain axons which are moving towards the brain, carrying impulses towards the brain. So there are certain axons moving towards the brain. certain axons which are moving from the brain towards the spinal cord, which are longitudinally carrying impulses towards the brain and away from the brain. Or certain times you may find even these nerve fibers which are moving crosswise, which also gives the white coloration to the outer region. Okay, so what did I say? I said that the outer region is white in color because of the presence of axons. So in the white region we find the axons which are longitudinally moving towards the brain and moving away from the brain towards the spinal cord. Along with that, axons from one side may cross to the other side, due to which we find the outer region which is white in color because of these axons. Along with that, if you observe carefully, in the central region we find a small passage. So that small passage is nothing but, we call this passage as a central canal. So children, if you remember the neural canal and the central canal, right? So we find the central canal in the center of the whole length of this spinal cord, right? So in this central canal we have a cerebrospinal fluid. So what do we find in the central canal? So in the central canal we find the cerebrospinal fluid, which performs a number of functions. So this cerebrospinal fluid continues to the cavities of the brain. Remember, I taught you about the ventricles of the brain. So thus the central canal, which is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid, runs the whole length of the backbone or whole length of the spinal cord, and it continues with the ventricles of the brain or the cavities inside the brain. So as we know, the cerebrospinal fluid performs a number of functions. It helps in the exchange of respiratory gases. It provides nutrients to the nerve cells, removes the metabolic waste from the nerve cells, and also, if you remember, it acts as a cushion. So it acts as a cushion to protect the spinal cord from the mechanical injuries. Okay, so just like the brain, even the spinal cord is also covered by 3 membranous coverings. If you remember, the outer dura mater, middle arachidoid, and inner pia mater, which are also enclosing the cerebrospinal fluid within them. Okay, now let us learn about the functions of the spinal cord. So what are the functions of the spinal cord? Spinal cord is a seat of reflex actions, especially below the neck. So what is the meaning of a reflex action? What is the meaning of a reflex action, children? Just observe this diagram. So this is the part where we find the receptors. So receptors are carrying impulses towards the spinal cord with the help of the sensory neuron, right? And we find the association neuron, and then after association neuron we find the motor neuron, which are carrying impulses towards the effectors, right? So what do you mean by reflex action? Reflex action is nothing but it is the sudden automatic action. It is the sudden automatic action responding to the stimulus. Responding to the stimulus, or in a simple words I can say it as they are the sudden actions which are responding to the various stimuli. Now take an example. When our hand comes in contact with the hot cooker, immediately within a fraction of a second we try to withdraw our hand. So in such situation we have impulses from the hot cooker, or the stimuli from the hot cooker is received into the sensory neuron. The sensory neuron conducts the impulses into the association neuron, from association neuron to the motor neuron, and then into the muscles of our hand to withdraw our hand. So you can say that this conduction of impulses from sensory to association, association to motor neuron occurs within a fraction of seconds. What do we call it? As a sudden action. So in this situation, now the impulses are not conveyed to the brain. So impulses are not conveyed to the brain. Instead of a brain, the spinal cord itself takes a decision that the person has to withdraw the hand from the hot cooker, otherwise his hand is burnt. So in this case, or in the case of a reflex action, the spinal cord itself acts as a brain, taking a decision to withdraw the hand. Right? In the same way, when your feet comes in contact with the thorn, immediately we try to withdraw our feet. So even in that reflex action or a sudden action, the spinal cord itself acts as a brain, taking up a decision so that the impulses are conducted to the feet so that your feet is not hurt. So such actions are known as a reflex actions. So what is the first function of a spinal cord? Spinal cord is a seat of reflex actions below the neck. Why below the neck? Because we have a spinal cord arising from the medulla oblongata and runs the whole length of the backbone. Right? So what is the second function of the spinal cord? The spinal cord conducts the sensory impulses. It conducts sensory impulses from skin and muscles, towards the brain. Children, if you observe here, it conducts the impulses from skin and muscles to the brain. So it conducts the impulses from the various muscles found from your neck region, okay, in the chest region or in the abdominal region. So from muscles and also from skin to the brain. Why not? Why not? We have mentioned about the eyes or ears or a tongue, because all these sense organs are found in the head region, right? Which are directly conducted to the brain. So thus you can say that the second function of spinal cord is conducting the sensory impulses from skin and muscles towards the brain. Right? So what is the third function of the spinal cord? The spinal cord conducts responses. So conducts responses. It conducts responses. What type of responses? That is motor responses from brain to the muscles and skin. So if you remember, this is the sensory impulses, that is from skin and muscles towards the brain, right? And it conducts the responses. Look at the children here. Responses, that is from brain towards the skin and the muscles. Okay, this is from different parts of the body, sensory impulses from different parts of the body to the brain, whereas motor responses, look here, this is the response. The motor responses or a motor impulses from brain to the skin followed by muscles. So these are the three different functions of spinal cord. So thus you can say that spinal cord is a seat of reflex actions below the neck. It conducts sensory impulses from skin to the brain and muscles to the brain, and also conducts the motor responses from brain to the skin and the muscles. So with this, children, we complete about the spinal cord. So go through the textbook. So you find this diagram in the textbook, learn thoroughly and draw this diagram in your classwork and try to label all the parts in your classwork.